What if the deadliest weapon is not a missile, but fear itself? Could it be that in the 21st century, the greatest threat to humanity is not found in the destructive power of bombs, but in the invisible tremors running through our collective psyche? Tonight, we explore a world where dread itself becomes the ultimate instrument of war. On a bone-chilling night in Moscow, the city seems to freeze mid-breath. The tension is suffocating. Every shadow stretches longer. Every echo resounds like a warning. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones is not just the winter's doing. It is the cold of uncertainty, of waiting for something irreversible to happen. In history, such nights have often preceded world-changing events. Recall the blackout nights during the Blitz in London, when families huddled in basements, fearing the whistle of bombs. But this night in Moscow is different. There are no bombs, only the ever-thickening fog of dread. Beneath the city, deep in Russia's command center, anxious officers fixate on glowing maps. Every choice tonight could decide the fate of millions. In that bunker, the air is taut with anticipation, much like the Cuban Missile Crisis rooms 6 decades earlier, where American and Soviet officers sat, knowing the world's survival hung on their restraint. A sudden hush sweeps the room. President Putin arrives, bearing the weight of an entire continent in his calm, unblinking gaze. Red markers flare across digital displays, each one a British base, each a possible spark. The officers stiffen, knowing the world's future may hinge on the next command. The moment recalls the tense silence before the storm at Waterloo, or the anxious hours before the first shots of the First World War, when decisions made in shadowed rooms determined destinies far beyond. Then, with one terse order, Russia's strategic forces leap to maximum alert. Submarine drones, the silent titans deep beneath the sea, await a single word to unleash devastation. These machines are the modern equivalent of the Doomsday devices theorized in Cold War nightmares, capable of rendering entire coastlines uninhabitable. The pressure is crushing. The planet stands poised on the edge of peace or obliteration. Suddenly, the airwaves crackle with a chilling message, sent far beyond Russia's borders. If attacked, Russia will retaliate in only 8 minutes. In living rooms and war rooms alike, millions grasp what hangs in the balance. Not just cities, but whole nations, not merely territory, but the fragile promise of tomorrow itself. The threat is explicit and immediate, echoing the kind of ultimatums that preceded the First World War, but with stakes multiplied by the power of nuclear arsenals. The world stands paralyzed, not by missiles in flight, but by the sheer, deliberate power of fear. This is warfare of a new order, where destruction is threatened, not delivered. Where the terrifying possibility of catastrophe forces governments to the edge. Every tick of the clock is loaded with dread, as the fate of millions hangs in silence. It is as if the world is reliving the standoff of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but with technology and stakes far greater. What brought the planet to such a precarious night, where fear alone could hold Europe hostage and remake the rules of global power? Why did deterrence, once thought to guarantee peace, become the very lever of terror? To answer that, we must unravel the choices, bluffs, and threats that escalated the crisis. The path to this night began long before the world realized it was standing at the edge. Consider the lessons of history. In the decades leading up to the First World War, alliances and arms races created a powder keg, waiting for a spark. Similarly, over the past decade, lines kept being crossed, each move tightening the noose. Year after year, NATO expanded its reach. Missiles appeared in Norway, Denmark, Poland, and Romania, forming a ring ever closer to Russia's borders. Each installation, each battalion, felt like another lock snapping shut, suffocating Moscow's sense of safety. This echoes the encirclement fears of pre-Second World War Germany, or the expansion of fortifications before the Franco-Prussian War, where each side interpreted defense as an act of aggression. In London, Parliament wasted no time. Backed by allies, they approved more deployments, fresh troops, upgraded missiles, the works. These decisions, dressed as defensive necessities, only deepened Moscow's anxiety. Across Western capitals, the same script played out. Security was the excuse, but to Russia, it sounded like a drumbeat of escalation. The cycle of action and reaction, familiar from the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, repeated itself with new actors and new technologies. Russian officials had warned, again and again, that every step would breed consequences. But their protests faded into background static, shrugged off or ignored by the West. The warnings became routine, then invisible, until the world suddenly stood at a precipice. History is littered with ignored warnings: the dispatches before Pearl Harbor, the telegrams before the German invasion of the Soviet Union. In each case, complacency blinded leaders to mounting peril. From London's flats to Vilnius's kitchens, and from the Kremlin's corridors to the Pentagon's bunkers, a grim understanding dawned. The world was now teetering on the edge of the unthinkable, a moment where miscalculation or pride could spark catastrophe. Consider the missteps that led to the outbreak of the First World War, a sequence of mobilizations, ultimatums, and misunderstandings, each deemed rational at the time, but together, catastrophic. This is the danger. Dismissing the signals means sleepwalking toward a disaster that might be impossible to reverse. The lessons of Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August echo through the decades. It is often not malice, but blindness and inertia that lead to the abyss. Then, in a single heartbeat, everything changed, one command away from plunging into chaos. The world has seen such moments before. The coded message sent before the Normandy landings, the red phone ringing in the White House during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yet rarely has the precipice been so stark, or the consequences so immediate. But the true weapon wasn't a missile, it was fear, deployed with chilling precision. That night, Europe learned how quickly the familiar can become fragile. The stability enjoyed for decades, underpinned by treaties and mutual deterrence, evaporated in the span of a single broadcast. Across Europe's capitals, fear spreads far faster than any missile. In the dead of night, inside a fortified command bunker on Moscow's outskirts, Vladimir Putin issues a single chilling order. Russia's Poseidon underwater drones, each armed with nuclear warheads, are to be placed on immediate standby. Without a sound, these steel leviathans slip beneath the Arctic ice, gliding unseen toward the western coasts. Their mission is both simple and apocalyptic. If activated, whole cities could vanish in less than 10 minutes. Publicly, the Kremlin makes its threat unmistakable. Any act of Western aggression, it warns, will trigger total destruction in just 8 minutes. The words ricochet through news networks and social media feeds, reverberating across an anxious world. The warning is reminiscent of President Kennedy's televised address during the Cuban crisis, but with the added immediacy and reach of modern communication. In London, Paris, and Berlin, chaos erupts. Markets nosedive as investors scramble to escape. Air raid sirens wail for the first time since the Second World War. Families flee to underground stations, clutching children and bags of necessities. Store shelves are emptied within a single night. Governments scramble for answers. There is no contingency plan, no script for the unthinkable. The panic is reminiscent of the hours after the September 11th attacks in the United States, when uncertainty and fear ruled every decision. In war rooms across the West, generals and intelligence chiefs confront a horrifying truth. There is no shield against these underwater drones, no defense system, no early warning, no last-minute miracle. Nations once thought secure are now exposed, utterly vulnerable. It echoes the dawning realization in the early years of the nuclear age that no city could be truly protected from intercontinental missiles. Everything is at stake. The credibility of Western deterrence, painstakingly built over decades, now hangs by a thread. The safety of millions, the authority of entire governments, the invisible trust binding societies together, all are threatened by a single display of power. The old rules, once defined by armies and treaties, are being swept aside by a new era, psychological warfare on a global scale. Yet as panic tightens its grip on Europe, Russia reveals a weapon more powerful than any bomb, a force that strikes without ever needing a warhead. The mere threat, not the act, becomes the ultimate demonstration of power. This is reminiscent of Sun Tzu's teachings. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. The world waits, paralyzed, for what comes next. In the silence, a new kind of war has already begun. It is a war waged in the minds of leaders and citizens, where every rumor and every tweet can tip the balance. What if true power is not found in destruction, but in the ability to make an entire world hold its breath, paralyzed by dread? Imagine a chess grandmaster who wins not by an elegant checkmate, but by making the opponent too terrified to move a piece. Beneath the frozen seas, the Poseidon drones crept towards their targets. No missiles launched. Instead, the world could only watch as the digital clock drained away, 8 minutes separating Europe from oblivion. The suspense is absolute, recalling the tension of the Doomsday clock inching closer to midnight during the Cold War. In Moscow's command bunker, an order flashed. Activate perimeter. Russia's legendary dead hand. If every leader were erased in a blinding instant, retaliation would surge forth anyway. Automatic, merciless, stripped of human restraint. This system, similar in concept to the American fail deadly protocols, ensures that no adversary could hope to decapitate the Russian state without consequence. Across Western capitals, leaders stared at the feeds from their fortified shelters. This was no act of lunacy. It was a calculated spectacle, a demonstration of control, not a declaration of war. The message was ice-cold and unmistakable. Russia's might did not depend on pressing the button. The mere possibility was enough to freeze the world. This recalls the standoffs of past centuries, the nuclear standoffs of the 20th century, the gunboat diplomacy of the 19th, but now magnified by technology and global interconnectedness. Panic and disbelief rippled outward. Sirens wailed in Paris for the first time since the Second World War. In London, voices quaked. What if this was not a bluff? On screens, analysts debated flight times, but the real weapon was already in play, the knowledge that annihilation could unfold at any moment, and no one could stop it. The uncertainty itself becomes a weapon, much like the unknown unknowns that haunted American strategists after the September 11th attacks. The world had crossed a threshold. No warheads had flown, but the rules of power had shifted overnight. The old doctrine of mutual destruction had been eclipsed by a new one, the absolute mastery of fear. Psychological brinkmanship now stood above brute force. In a world once governed by treaties and clear red lines, ambiguity and signaling now reigned supreme. The effects were immediate, shattering. If the highest power belongs to those who can push civilization to the edge, without stepping over, who can be trusted with such restraint? Treaties, deterrence, the illusion of safety, all shattered in the space of 8 minutes. The world, like the tightrope walker over Niagara Falls, balanced between survival and disaster, every step magnified by the gaze of billions. What can history learn from a night when 8 minutes undid decades of certainty, and fear itself became the world's most devastating weapon? How do societies recover from the realization that safety was always an illusion, that order is as fragile as the nerves of those who guard it? But the aftermath would not be measured in shattered cities. Instead, it would unfold in every whispered conversation, every sleepless night, and every recalculated strategy across the globe. The psychological scars would last longer than any physical devastation, as occurred after the false alarms of the Cold War, when near misses haunted the dreams of those in command. What choices remain when fear itself becomes the sharpest weapon in the world's arsenal? What can governments and societies do to reclaim a sense of agency when the tools of war now target the mind as much as the body? On this night, Russia did not rain destruction upon its neighbors. Instead, it wielded fear with surgical precision, refusing annihilation while making its resolve unmistakable. The menace was unmistakable, intentions laid bare, yet the final, fateful step was left untaken. The restraint shown is reminiscent of moments in history when leaders pulled back from the brink, such as Kennedy's decision during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or Gorbachev's refusal to intervene in Eastern Europe in 1989. This is the essence of modern psychological warfare. By broadcasting a readiness for total war without launching a single missile, Russia froze its adversaries in place. In those suspended moments, European leaders were forced to watch, unable to act, while millions of ordinary people faced the sudden shattering of their sense of safety. The strategy calls to mind the doctrine of shock and awe, but turned inward, using the threat instead of the action. The lesson is unyielding. Peace is more than the silence of weapons. It is the absence of fear. But fear can be manufactured, sharpened, and unleashed upon the hearts of entire societies. When a nation shows it is prepared to risk everything, it compels its rivals to question every assumption, every defense, every strategy. For citizens, such a night strips away illusions. The order that protects us depends on invisible signals, secret calculations, and the careful shaping of perception. Recognizing these forces is not only the work of diplomats and generals, it is a civic duty, an armor against manipulation and panic. Practical steps for resilience include media literacy, emergency preparedness, and the cultivation of trust in local communities. For example, in Finland, regular civil defense drills and transparent communication help blunt the impact of psychological threats. For those in power, the old rules no longer suffice. Deterrence and retaliation alone cannot withstand the new era. Survival now depends on deciphering signals, countering psychological attacks, and building resilience not just in militaries, but in communities and minds. The United States Department of Homeland Security, for instance, runs public campaigns to counter disinformation, recognizing that societal cohesion is as vital as missile defense. The stakes could not be higher. If we fail to adapt, the next confrontation may not end with threats, but with irreversible catastrophe. Yet if we learn from this moment, if we master the art of perception, we might still prevent disaster. History rewards those who adapt. The nations that survived the Great Wars were those that learned, evolved, and built new systems of trust and communication. Because this is no longer just a Russian story. It is a warning to anyone who still believes in yesterday's certainties. The world changes not only through events, but through the stories we believe about those events. But how close did Europe truly come to disaster that night? Only by understanding the hidden choreography of those 8 minutes can we grasp the new rules shaping our future. Imagine, for a moment, a scenario where a single misread signal, a technical glitch, or a rogue actor could have sent the world spinning into darkness. Such close calls have happened before. In 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov chose not to report a false alarm of incoming missiles, arguably saving the world from nuclear war. Are you truly prepared for a world where fear itself is the deadliest weapon? What steps have you taken to build personal and collective resilience? Have you rehearsed what you would do if the unthinkable became real? On that frozen night, missiles slept in their underground tombs. No city turned to ash, and no alarms shattered the silence. Yet, in only a few breathless hours, millions felt the weight of extinction, not from exploding warheads, but from the sudden, suffocating surge of dread. The psychological impact is not unlike the Great Fear that swept France in 1789, when rumors of invasion and chaos prompted mass panic, even before a single battle was fought. Moscow delivered its warning with chilling clarity. In less than 8 minutes, vast nations could be wiped from the map. But the real threat was not the arsenal itself. It was the knowledge that, at any heartbeat, devastation could be unleashed, forcing leaders everywhere to teeter between rash action and paralyzing fear. This is the new battlefield. Security is measured not just by missiles or armies, but by who commands the nerves of the world. That night, Russia showed it could push every leader to the brink, not by firing a single shot, but by flaunting absolute readiness and the will to use it. The line between peace and oblivion thinned to nothing, and fear became the most destructive force on earth. So what does this mean for us? it means the next great struggle may unfold not on scarred ground, but in the minds of millions. If governments cling to outdated power, if societies overlook shifts in the shadows, they gamble everything: their honor, their people, the future of continents. The illusion of safety can vanish in a single night, replaced by a world where psychological brinkmanship decides who truly rules. Because now, the rules are rewritten. Those who weaponize fear will shape not just borders, but the fate of generations. To meet this challenge, both governments and citizens must practice vigilance, foster open dialogue, and invest in psychological resilience. Only by recognizing the power of fear and learning how to resist its manipulation can we ensure that the next crisis does not end in catastrophe. The night may have passed without explosions, but its lesson endures. In a world armed with doomsday machines, the battle for the future will be fought as much within our minds as on any battlefield. The deadliest weapon, it turns out, is the one that makes us believe we are already defeated.